podcasting from Memphis, Tennessee. He's a soldier, storyteller, historian, and maybe a bit of a hellraiser. Click, listen, and enjoy. It's Dave Carter on the Ricochet Audio Network.
So it's a news-packed day, which follows a news-packed week, which follows the summer of love, which is defined as assault, looting, arson, and general destruction. And we've had our own little bit of drama here on the Dave Carter program as well. I pre-recorded what turned out to be a phenomenal interview with New York Times best-selling author, attorney, and prolific commentator David Limbaugh, only to have a very rare digital glitch take the recording and make it challenging, to say the least. So for my fellow podcast nerds, here's what happened. I use a Mackie Pro FX8 version 2 soundboard, and that connects via USB to my MacBook, which generally works out really, really well. It's a phenomenal soundboard, solid dynamic mic, good studio mic, but every now and then it's as if the input from the soundboard overwhelms the recording software in the MacBook, so that you end up with this static, this high-pitched distortion that sounds like my car speakers have been blown out due to excessive volume, because that's basically what I did to almost every car I've ever owned over the years. But that's another story. The result was that while my conversation with David Limbaugh sounded great in real time, the quality was superb and the content was outstanding, of course, as you'd expect when you're interviewing Mr. Limbaugh. But when I played it back, it was full of static. It reduced me to a sputtering, cursing disaster here in just a few seconds. So I talked it over with David yesterday. The options were, 1, to try and reduce the static as much as possible and press on, or 2, try and reschedule the interview, which is no easy task. Of course, he's always the gentleman. David said he would understand either way that I decided to go, and would be fine if I decided to go with the interview as done, rather than try and recreate the thing, which is always a challenge when you lose the spontaneity of the moment. Overall, I concluded that the value and the relevance of David's analysis and commentary in real time outweigh the static in the recording. I've gone in post-production and was able to diminish the static to some extent. It's still there. Trust me, it's there. It's the first thing you'll notice. But it's not as overwhelming a distraction, and doesn't render the thing unlistenable. So with that, I'm going to go ahead with this pre-recorded interview with the following caveat, or disclaimer, if you will. The following recording features a great deal of insight, candid thoughts and opinions expressed with passion and wisdom. However, the sound quality itself is reminiscent of listening to a distant radio station through a speaker with a hole in it. David's portion of the exchange is much easier to understand than mine, which is good, since he obviously does the bulk of the talking in the interview. So that will help, but it is a distraction, and I apologize for that, and I'll do a better job next time of checking things out ahead of the interview to make sure all is in working order. At any rate, I think you'll enjoy the conversation, though the sound quality might be best enjoyed with a good scotch, or maybe some cheap Mad Dog, maybe some Cajun wine, Jacques Daniel, or something like that. But either way, totally up to you, and with that, off we go. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get down to brass tacks here with my friend, New York Times best-selling author, attorney, and prolific commentator David Limbaugh. He's written extensively on the political scene and on cultural issues, but I suppose I might as well betray my own bias in favor of his books on the Christian faith, which include Jesus on Trial, A Lawyer Affirms the Truth of the Gospel, which was a masterful and scholarly analysis, along with a great many other books that he's written. And oh yes, David has a brother you may have heard of. I think he's interested in getting into broadcasting, if I have that right, David?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Well, of course, our prayers are with Rush, and we know that he gives updates on how he's doing when he feels appropriate. So I won't hit you up for information, but just please relay to him our best wishes and my ongoing prayers for him and for the entire family.
Will do. Thank you.
So I haven't seen you since you were kind enough to stop by the truck stop years ago when I was held over for the night there in Cape Girardeau. So you been doing all right?
Very well. How about you?
Trying to stay out of trouble, one step ahead of the law, and trying to keep my picture out of the post office. So far, so good. I was all revved up to discuss an article that you wrote way back in time 2 weeks ago. It was called "Trump Will Win in November," but then Justice Ginsburg passed away a week ago, and the political landscape took on a whole new dimension. So first of all, taking a view from, say, 30,000 feet, and I know there are a lot of variables that we'll get into in a moment, but how much of an impact do you think that the vacancy on the court will have on the presidential election this time around?
Well, I think it's one of a number of very important factors. I definitely think it's relevant because both sides are very energized about the future of the court and the composition of the court. And it's just another thing for the left to go bonkers over. And it cuts both ways because if we have the hearings and the left does what it ordinarily does, which is demonstrate its insanity and unfairness and outrageousness and being unhinged, then I think that cuts in our favor because it will be on top of the riots they're enabling and actually supporting and refusing to control the riots and the rest of their lack of law and order, demeanor, and reputation. So I think that will really help us. And I think on our side, it energizes our voters too, and it energizes their voters, I have to admit. So it's a complex array of issues and factors involved in that. But that's one of many, definitely, that will be very relevant.
Well, I've seen people describe on social media the riots, the rioters, the looters, as Joe Biden's get out the vote movement, because they do a great deal to help us out. Now, they've been making threats about burning the place down, I guess, again. I mean, they burn the place down if there's a day of the week that ends with a letter Y. But what do you make of, I mean, what should the response be from our side when they make those threats? Or should
you mean when who makes those
when they say we're going to burn the place down? I'm not sure that there's much we can do at this point, but it's just so maddening that to be held hostage, basically, or to have threats made at us.
Well, I think we have to get the word out to disempower and discredit and refute their propaganda. They are the ones who are threatening to burn down the country if Trump wins. And yet, like everything else, they're projecting and acting like Trump is the one who won't peaceably surrender power if he loses. Now, I find that the question from the Playboy reporter, will you peaceably transfer power, to be a when did you quit beating your wife question, because he interprets the question. I know never Trumpers go nuts, but they think we always apologize and lie for him. I think Trump interpreted that question as, will you concede in advance not to contest the election, even if there's fraud? And he won't. And there's no way he's going to use military force to remain in office. He very well may legally contest the election. But it's so bizarre because the left probably wouldn't concede. They never did concede 2016. They've been fighting him ever since. They've been trying to get him out of office. They've been trying to deny his legitimacy and presidential credibility. And they have the audacity to act like he won't. Hillary started this before in one of the last debates in the 2016. He refused to do it. And then ever after, she refused to do exactly what she went bonkers anticipating that he would refuse to do. These people are just unhinged. It's all you can say.
It is projection, and Rush has made that point several times. We saw them try to litigate their way to the White House in 2000. And there's no doubt that they'll try to litigate their way to the White House no matter what happens this time. So what they're essentially asking Trump is, you're not going to behave the way we do, are you? It wouldn't be nice.
Exactly. And I really, to them, they are an end justifies the means philosophy. And so to them, it's for the higher good. And I don't know what their rank and file believe, but their leadership is as corrupt as it gets. And that's more true, coming out more true every day with the revelations about the ongoing revelations about the Russia investigation. And just everything they're doing. They're willing to undermine our system, circumvent the Electoral College because they can't get it done through the amendment process, lower the voting age to 16, add territories and states that are Democratic favoring, to oppose voter ID law in the false name of racism so that we can't verify that people are who they say they are. Flood the ballots with mail-in, unverifiable mail-in ballots, not absentee mail-in. They are just full of corruption and appointing, by the way, activist judges who will disregard the Constitution and rewrite it in their image.
Exactly.
And they have the audacity to act like we are not law and order, rule of law people. They aren't, by definition, and they're proud of it.
Yeah.
So we've got to counter it. Yeah, we've got to counter it. We've got to stop this. We've got to fight this propaganda. Thank goodness Trump does fight it.
Indeed. Winding back to the court for just a minute, I really thought it couldn't get much worse after they tried to destroy Brett Kavanaugh's character and his wife with his unproven and hideous accusations. And I was, here's a question, by the way. I just thought about this, but do you think that the Kavanaugh nomination, looking back, do you think that nomination would have gone through had a more, let's say, traditional Republican president been in office? Mitt Romney?
No way. They don't have the guts. This is what makes Trump so appealing. For the first time in the longest time, we have a Republican president who fights back as hard as the liberals. He doesn't fight dirty, but he fights tooth and nail and meets them glove for glove, and taking the gloves off. And no, our people, George Bush, I really liked the guy during the time, but I'm so sick of this idea that you ought to consider elitism and civility the highest virtue when the left doesn't treat us civilly. I'm not saying we should be uncivil, but our highest virtue ought not be saying, hi, we're so wonderful, we want to meet you halfway.
Yeah.
The left, there is nothing to meet the left halfway on. They want to destroy the country as founded. You don't compromise with people who want to destroy it as founded. You defeat them. Rush says that all the time. I said it in my last book. There's no compromising with these people. Every time you compromise, you move the football down toward their goal line. And you can look at the steady march of liberalism, statism, socialism for the last 70 years, the last 100 years, when progressivism started and planted its feet in the United States. FDR, the government expanded. We've got the government control of education, health care. It's all the way through. And we're losing. We are losing in the long haul. They've got control of the institutions because they were patient, strategic, and we sit around twiddling our thumbs, saying we're wonderful, they're wonderful. And there's just it's a pendulum swing on both sides, and there's sometimes it's good to have Democrats. No, it's not good to have commies in office, and they are full-blown Marxists in control of that party now. I'm not.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just thinking that what we're dealing with and what they're trying to do to the country, I don't see any virtue in taking a punch to the chops and saying, thank you, may I have another?
No. This idea of, Obama was a great guy. He was wonderfully nice. He wasn't. He was a partisan, race-baiting human being. The fact that he was black doesn't mean that I need to pull my punches when I discuss him. That's a form of racism.
Right.
I treat him like an equal human being. And he was a guy who stirred race animus throughout the country. He advanced the state. He cheated when it came to passing his laws. He got into, he issued all kinds of lawless executive orders. And he abused the office of the Attorney General. Eric Holder was his wingman, and they want to complain about our Attorney General today. No, we finally have to fight back. And by the way, I am not suggesting that we go as low as they do and break the rules. All I'm saying is we fight them, and we know, and that starts with understanding what they're about. And what they're about is dismantling this country as founded. I mean, it's in everything they advocate.
Sure.
They are not capitalists anymore. And the capitalism, if we don't have a free market in this country, we lose the ability to create wealth. Government can't create wealth. We have to have the ability for government to create wealth as opposed to redistribute it. So this is a fight to the finish here. And people who say, who downplay how significant this election is, are fooling themselves. They're obtuse, they're naive, or willfully ignorant.
If government could create wealth, Venezuela would be paradise. Cuba would be paradise,
Exactly.
But it's not.
I mean, we should have learned this lesson with John Smith in colonial times when they tried to have a commune. It doesn't work. Some people don't work. You have to have an incentive for people to work instead of having a rampant welfare state which breaks up the family, breaks up the nuclear family, and disincentivizes work. And you try to reform that, and you're accused of hating people, being uncompassionate, being a racist. I mean, these issues, it's every issue. They cannot win on the merits of these arguments, so now they trot out racism at every turn. And by the way, I'm going to tell you something. People on our side who poo-poo this and poo-poo the effectiveness of this is why it's so easy for them to hate Trump supporters and conservatives. Do you realize that they think that by definition we are intrinsically conservative? I mean, intrinsically racist.
Oh, sure.
You talk, at least 40% of Democrats think that our default position is racism. It blows my mind how brainwashed they've been.
And it's projection.
If you suggest to them, they'll laugh at you if you suggest you're not.
Right. And it's projection all over again. My wife had an exchange briefly with someone on social media, and she said, look, I support Trump, but we're allowed to disagree and still be friends, right? And the person literally called her a racist. If you support Trump, you're a racist. And there's no evidence to that, but that's the default, that's the knee-jerk reaction.
But let me tell you their evidence. Some of their evidence is he's an immigration hawk. He's an immigration hawk because he wants to preserve orderly immigration. You can't have a country overrun and no legal, orderly immigration system and preserve the integrity of your nation. You cannot possibly do it, and the Democrats know that. They just don't care because they want to flood they want to flood the country with presumably Democrat voters. That's all it's about to them.
Right.
But it has our opposition to illegal immigration has nothing to do with race. Mexican. It's absurd. It's absurd to suggest that. There is no single race in the United States. I don't even know what ethnic background I come from. German, Scott, what? I don't even care. I hope to be colorblind.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I'm an evil white guy, and I've got privilege and all that. But I'm telling you, and then they lie that Trump said there's some good KKK people. There's some good whites. He didn't say that.
Never
he
said
said
that.
there are some good people who support who oppose the tearing down of monuments. And that doesn't make you racist either.
Right.
I mean, I'm telling you this. And by the way, too, they don't want to just tear down Southern monuments. They want to tear down all monuments. Just like the French, the Jacobins, the French Revolution, They want to dismantle everything in our history and start all over, including Christianity.
Mark Levin had the perfect description for this. He called it cultural purging. And that's what they're trying to do.
Yes.
Well, I will say in the Republicans' favor right now, at least, they seem to have had a spinal transfusion thanks to the president, and I think they're going to press forward with this nomination. So that's good. Before, they suffered from what I call premature capitulation. They just gave up before they even started.
Yeah, preemptive surrender.
Yeah, right. I don't think that'll be the case this time.
No, and it wouldn't bother me if they didn't have a hearing, if it's somebody, the Senate Judiciary Committee, if it's somebody they've recently vetted, like Amy Coney Barrett,
Sure.
Because it's a farce anyway. They're not out to determine whether a judge is qualified. Of course she's qualified, and she will adhere to the Constitution. Case closed. But almost by definition, Democratic nominees are not qualified if you care at all about the Constitution. What a Supreme Court justice's primary duty is to honor the Constitution, and no, I don't know of any Democrat judges anymore, any leftist, non-originalist, activist judges, which is the only kind they appoint, are qualified in the ultimate sense. We still don't stop them. They get their appointments, and if they're legally qualified, if they're smart, if they go to a good school, it doesn't matter if they dismantle the Constitution. If Republicans fought back like the liberals do, we would say there's a distinction in kind rather than degree. This isn't just Democrats get their nominees and we get ours. It's ass backwards. They block our people precisely because they honor the Constitution. Our people are the only ones qualified in the true sense. We ought to oppose every one of their judges who disregard by philosophy the Constitution. These judges like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I can't believe the extent to which we're deifying her. Why do I have to say, and I said on Twitter, decorum and grace and civility require us to honor the dead, especially the recent dead, but they don't require us to lie and say what a wonderful jurist she is. Why would I say she's a wonderful jurist if she is the kind of person who will destroy the separation of powers and the system of federalism, both of which, and the civil and the Bill of Rights, which are essential to the preservation of our constitutional system which is essential to the preservation of our liberties, which is essential to our prosperity and our kids' future. Why am I required to lie about that?
I agree. Now, on that point, I'm going to be talking here in a little bit with another guy from Ricochet, Henry Reset, and he wrote a column just a few days ago called About That Vacancy. I want to read to you 2 or 3 sentences and get your reaction, please. He wrote, quote, "People are confused about what conservative means when we're speaking of the Supreme Court. Conservative and liberal when it comes to the Supreme Court is a little bit like firefighter and arsonist when it comes to house fires. The purpose of the Supreme Court is to interpret and uphold the Constitution. Its purpose isn't to rewrite the Constitution, to reinvent the Constitution, or to fix the Constitution. It isn't to burn the Constitution down." Unquote. Does that analogy ring true with you too?
That's exactly what I just said.
Yeah.
Liberals are it's not liberal versus conservative. It's liberal activists versus originalists. There aren't any conservative activists. We don't have judges on our side who advocate ruling from the bench to say abortion is legal in every state. What we do is say, like Bork said, we say that the federal government has no business in it, and it goes back to the states and for them to decide. And so the liberal is a misnomer, except to the extent that almost all liberal judges happen to be liberal activist judges. But political conservatives who happen to be judges do not actively push conservative policy. They interpret the law according to the Constitution.
Exactly.
There is a radical difference, and that's what Seth or whoever your guy was said.
You got one faction that wants to look at the Constitution and pluck out an unknown, non-existent right to stick a fork in a baby's head. The other faction says, no, wait, we don't need to do that. That's madness, and that's the faction that's vilified. So you're exactly right.
But if you can be a pro-abortionist and a constitutionalist, and still, that's not going to happen. But in theory, you could be a pro-choice, so-called pro-choice person, and if you were an originalist, you would outlaw you would overturn Roe versus Wade.
Sure, kick it back to the states.
Yes, but by the way, I don't know why anybody thinks that that's going to happen, even if we get a 6-3 court. Because I don't think you've already seen what happens with Roberts, Kavanaugh. Sometimes they have this reverential deference to precedent, and so it doesn't matter if there's been bad law. As long as it's been on the books or in the court decisions for 70 years, a guy like Kavanaugh may be reluctant to overturn it. And they also may be afraid, like Roberts, the ultimate politician on the bench, he may be afraid that will cause disruption in society. Is the left ever afraid of that?
No, of course not.
But I have no fantasy that any so-called conservative court, even an originalist court, is going to have the guts to overturn Roe versus Wade. I could be wrong. I'll be pleasantly surprised if that happens.
I'm afraid you're right, though. Last question. I know we're pressed for time. Last question. And I've asked this to several people, but I'd like to get your take on it. You remember in 2016 we had the Flight 93 analogy.
Yeah.
It was just our last chance, and we hear that almost every time. Now, I know some people dispute this, but I have to wonder if there is such a thing. I talked to Vic Davis-Hanson about this a few weeks ago. If there is such a thing as a point of no return in our national life, and in your opinion, if we're reaching that point, or have we already reached it?
Do you mean that if we re-elect Trump and we get a Senate majority, can we salvage the country and start having it turn around back in our favor and restore some of the liberties, or is it on a steady march with the systems that have been put in place to destroy it? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. Or if Biden wins, are we done? Is it we're toast?
Oh. Okay. Well, I often say that those are the consequences. That in the sense, I would say this. If I'm speaking conservatively, that is with restraint, and trying to eradicate all hyperbole or all possibility of hyperbole, which is probably impossible for me because I'm very passionate. But I think the chances are greatly increased that we're irreversibly gone down the rat hole to a fundamentally different kind of country. We're so close now. We're so close. We're a hybrid system now, socialist system. Right. Our national debt is astronomical, and we can't even attack entitlements, which is the only way to get a handle on that. because the Democrats have made clear that anytime you try to reform entitlements, even before you do, they accuse you of hating old women, old men, and destroying, taking away their Social Security. We have to eventually reform entitlements. Trump was never on board with that. I hope that if he wins a second term, we can prevail upon him to finally reform in that sense. He's been met with unbelievable challenges because of COVID and had to start spending like a Democrat. And I realize that we've spent too much. That's one thing that we one of the few things on policy that I worry about. But I really believe ultimately Trump has come around on so many issues, and his head is in the right place on so many issues, that I really believe that we can, if we win, turn this entitlement thing around. And that, by the way, that's understated. When Paul Ryan was talking about it, we were in serious trouble. We're way worse now. And Ryan was right about it. But no, yes, if Biden wins, I think there's a chance that we cannot return for a very, very long time, if ever. Because the things they want to do, as Rush talks about, they want to change the system. They want to stack the courts. Imagine if they stack the courts. They get their liberals in office. These liberal prosecutors will not prosecute lawbreakers, and they'll prosecute people who don't break the law. And then you have the appellate judges that are liberals that won't even hold them to account. It's scary because everything they see is ends justify the means. It didn't used to be the case. There used to be so many honest judges, no matter what their political ideology was. But when you get these radical leftists, these Obama holder type leftists on the court, it is a scary situation. And so you have the litany of things I pointed out a minute ago, the things that are going to stack the system, make D.C. a state, Puerto Rico, all these places, flood the country with new Democrat voters, continue to lie about us being racist. I just don't see, and then continue to spend and redistribute wealth. Eventually, do you think there's anything morally or constitutionally, do you think there's anything keeping them from taking away 401ks of people? Obama
nothing stands. That's what they mean by fundamental transformation. They do what they want.
They'll do what they want, and there won't be judges in there to stop them.
Right.
Stack a court if they successfully. I mean, it's horrifying. Here's the difference between people who poo-poo this and me. People don't realize how the actual character of the left and what they're willing to do. And I don't understand why they're not. The left is telling us. They're telegraphing it. They're telling us exactly what they're willing to do. They don't believe in the country. They hate its founding. They think we are all racist. They don't believe that the founders built in the possibility, the likelihood, the inevitability of slavery failing. They give them no credit for the things that occurred in building in liberty. No, they're all racist, and we've got to undo. They're accepting this propaganda of Black Lives Matter, that there's systemic racism. There's a war on cops. They want to defund cops. That alone, defunding ICE and cops, ought to tell you that if they get unchecked power, there's no turning back in the United States.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, the more I talk myself, there's a million other things I can tell you. But I'm ultimately an optimist, so if they do win, I'm going to fight like hell to keep what I'm saying from happening to happen.
Good. And I'll be right there with you. Thank you. Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I appreciate it. And please give our best to Rush, okay?
I will. Nothing like hyperventilating. I told you I shouldn't go on this podcast.
Put you on oxygen next time.
I can just wait and see the Ricochet people who are way less radical than I am saying I'm a psycho. But, I can't help it.
No, but you're passionate about the right things in the right way, so I applaud it.
You're a good man. Always enjoyed talking to you. Thank you,
sir.
much.
Take care. Folks, that's David Limbaugh on the Dave Carter program.
We're talking with Pat Sajak. There's almost a vaudeville quality to the humor at times, which I think is missing. Were you influenced by those folks?
Oh, sure. I mean, first of all, I'm old. So, of course, those are the people I grew up
to school with.
Yeah, look, time. I don't begrudge change. It happens. Humor changes. Deliveries change. But I'm not going to try to adapt to that and be hip and all that stuff. I'm not hip. The only time you see the word hip associated with me if it's followed by the word replacement.
If your speakers are making a funny sound, you're listening to The Dave Carter Show.
Well, my friend, it's been a pleasure as always and an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so very much.
Dave, thank you, and don't ever ask me to do this again.
Dave Carter.
It's always a lot of fun to talk to Pat Sajak, and it's always an education to talk with David Limbaugh. I mean, he was great, wasn't he? And he's passionate. And you know what? He provides a perfect example of the fact that you can be passionate and still not threaten or assault people, or tear things up, or burn things down, or live out the new rallying cry, which is apparently no justice, no flat screens. No, you don't have to do that. You can be informed, you can be passionate, and you can make a difference. Which is what Dave Limbaugh does. So if you're enjoying the show here today, you should also take advantage of the many other things that the Ricochet Audio Network has to offer. For example, Andrew Klavan's got a show here. Commentary Magazine has a show. Nick Plosser's got a show, The 0.5%, dedicated to interviewing vets and active duty folks. It's a great show. And then there's his flagship podcast and a great deal more. There's something really for everyone here. Everyone that's interested. There's a lot of good conversations. So now, as a rule, if you want to comment on the podcast post or comment on main feed posts or read or comment on the member side only part of the house behind the paywall, that's going to run you $4.50 a month. Now, if you spend just 50 cents more per month, you can write and publish your own articles on Ricochet and let the whole wide world see what you think about things. But here's an idea. Let's just say that you're not sure you want to cough up $4.50 or $5 a month to find out about all this stuff. Well, here's what we got for listeners to this program. Go to ricochet.com/gumbo. Since I'm a kid from Louisiana, it just makes sense. That's ricochet.com/gumbo. You can get a free 30-day trial of Ricochet. Take a look, kick the tires, do donuts in the church parking lot, write what you want, hear what you want, comment on what you want. And then after 30 days, if you want to continue your membership, well, then $4.50 gets you in the door. Sound all right? Of course it does. So just head on over to ricochet.com/gumbo. That's GUMBO. And you too can be part of the conversation.
Compelling conversation and maybe a giggle or two. It's Dave Carter on Ricochet.
Now, I've been asked how I go about deciding which Ricochet members to invite on the program here. Well, first of all, you have to be a Ricochet member, which I know is pretty self-evident. But I stress that in order to also stress that if you take advantage of my offer of a free 30-day trial membership at Ricochet, then who knows, you could end up here as well. Now, the selection process that I use is really rather simple, if somewhat random. So there are a couple of things that I look for, a couple of things that I go for in the selection process. First, when I see an article that really speaks to a current issue of significance in an especially compelling way, or if the article speaks to an issue that isn't splashing all over the place, but it's just so well written and thought-provoking that I think the author will be fascinating as well, then I invite them on. Or, since I've been on Ricochet, ever since Peter Robinson descended from the mountaintop with those stone tablets containing the code of conduct, I've been able to follow the work of some writers who are perpetually interesting and whose insight is always worth reading and understanding, no matter what they write about. And I'm happy to say that Mr. Hank Resett fits perfectly into both of those categories. On his profile, he describes himself this way: I'm a 50-something father of 6 who divides his time between writing industrial automation software and opining cantankerously about the precariousness of Western civilization and the enemy's many unwitting arrayed against it. I'm fascinated by words, evolution, emergent behavior, the challenge of Islam, the absurdity of the trans movement, and saving the most successful nation and culture in history. I'm a climate empiricist. I'll believe in global warming when I see evidence of global warming, but I don't see it yet. And it's an honor and a treat indeed to welcome Mr. Hank Resett onto the program. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Dave, and thank you. It's a lovely introduction.
Yes, well, you wrote it. You did a great job.
Well, that's right.
So how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
I think we're both working on a pot of coffee here, right?
We are.
Okay. Well, thanks for taking the time to be on the show.
My pleasure.
I'm thinking that you're one of those guys, or you're one of those people who could write an essay about making a ham sandwich and make it interesting, kind of like James Lilacs. But your piece from just a few days ago, titled "About That Vacancy," which details the Supreme Court vacancy after Justice Ginsburg's passing. I mean, it's as thorough an examination as I've seen anywhere. So after reading your piece, I suspect you and I will probably agree on a great deal here. But I'd like for folks to hear your thoughts directly. For example, you talk about the supposed hypocrisy of Senator McConnell, who declined to move forward on President former President Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to the court, and yet he's poised to move forward with President Trump's nomination. What's your response to that criticism, please, sir?
Well, as I wrote, it's a false claim of hypocrisy, because hypocrisy requires that the same situation's being dealt with in two different ways, and that's not the case here. It's in the case of President Obama in 2016, when he was trying to replace Justice Scalia with Merrick Garland. He was a lame duck president with a Senate in opposition hands, trying to replace a vacancy that occurred in his last year in office. And never in U.S. history has the Senate approved such a nomination. When the Senate's in opposing hands, it's natural that the Senate is going to put up some resistance to a candidate, a justice. And that's what happened. McConnell brilliantly, frankly, in my opinion, said, no, we're not going to, we were elected by the American people, Republicans, as the Senate, to stand in opposition to a Democratic president, and we're going to do that. And he did. It was great. And this year's very different. It's we have a Republican president, Republican Senate. That's what the American people put there. And it's his first term. It's perfectly reasonable for the Senate to approve his next nomination. Right,
because part of what happened was that the Republican Senate happened since President Obama's reelection. So the most recent time the people spoke, they wanted the Republican Senate. So that
exactly. And they left the Senate in Republican hands 2 years ago, which suggests that we're supposed to cooperate with it. Senate can do its job and work with the president.
So it requires a little bit more of a nuanced view to see the specifics, but they're there nonetheless. But this is not a time when people are given to a lot of nuance, unfortunately, as we saw in the news last night. What do you make of the claim that it was Justice Ginsburg's dying wish that her seat on the court not be filled until a new president was sworn in?
Well, that's a funny one. It's a little bit nuanced. One, we don't. I got to be careful here. We don't actually know that she said that. It's a hearsay or secondhand account. But let's assume she did. We don't know that she said it with an intent that it be made public. It could have been a private comment to a family member. She was an ill woman. I find it a sad comment if she made it, and I hope she didn't. Because she doesn't. There's no nice way to say this. She didn't own the seat. She held the seat and on the court, and we have a process for choosing the next justice, and I would rather think that a sitting justice did not try to influence that process unduly from the court. That's not a seemly process. It's something that I would hope Ginsburg didn't do. I think she respected the court immensely. She was a fine jurist, even though I didn't agree with her on a lot of things. I'd like to think that she respected the dignity of the court and would have left it to the process to choose her successor.
I would hope so. And I would also, the only thing that gives me pause is the idea that someone who has fought courageously and so strongly with the battle of cancer. I mean, I've seen that in my own family, and if I have a dying wish, it's not going to be about politics. If I have a dying wish, it's going to be that there'll be no guitar strumming at my funeral. That's it. Well, if there is, I'll reach out and strangle them. But other than that, no. It's politics. Life is about a lot more than that.
Right, and the other half of it is that even if she did say that, it's irrelevant. It's sadly irrelevant. Whatever her wishes were regarding, she could have as easily, for example, wished that some decision of hers never be overturned. That would also be peculiarly inappropriate.
It makes as much sense. Yeah.
And it doesn't have any bearing on what the nation has to do.
Well, and as someone, I think it was Todd Starnes observed on social media the other day, they were talking about the Supreme Court, not the Make-A-Wish Foundation here.
There you go.
So it's not a monarchy, and the Constitution doesn't require. In fact, I've read that even George Washington nominated 2 people for the court during election years. So there's a precedent for this. Now, in the article, you make the case that filling the court's vacancy is actually quite necessary under the current circumstances, and you talk about the looming presidential election as being one of them. Is your opinion that it's pretty much a given that the Democrats will try to litigate their way to the White House, assume if things don't go the way that they want, obviously, on Election Day?
I think it's almost unavoidable. I think we're seeing so many signs that I'm not a conspiracist. I don't believe in conspiracies usually. I think emergent behavior, as I mentioned in my profile, just natural human nature bubbles up and causes all sorts of peculiar things to happen. Right. I think that we're seeing a lot of different forces pushing for chaos in the election. The mail-in ballot situation being the most prominent, probably, but you can't institute a new way of handling tens of millions of votes in an election year under these circumstances and expect anything other than chaos.
Particularly at the 11th hour.
That's right, and it's strange. Little side note: you will hear from the left all the time how there's no evidence of ballot fraud. There's a little, and that's the next thing that needs to be talked about in a very commonsensical way. There's enormous evidence for ballot fraud. There's enormous evidence that mail-in ballots are insecure. We're setting the stage for chaos in this election, and we absolutely need a full Supreme Court with an odd number of members present to adjudicate it, because it seems to me inevitable that unless it's a landslide for Biden, just exactly like that little think tank group, the Democrat. Yeah. I forget the name of it, but
they gamed
the Democrat
it out, essentially.
Study group. They gamed it out, and what they concluded was, unless Biden wins in a landslide, you can expect the cities to burn more than they're burning today. It's going to be chaos. And I think we've been put on notice that that's what's coming, and we need to be prepared for it.
And that
dealing with it.
Yeah. So an even number of justices would be a recipe for absolute chaos.
Right. Unless, it's entirely possible that even an even number of justices evenly split would conclude reasonably. The Supreme Court agrees more than people realize about issues. All of the justices, almost all the justices, are reasonable people, and they often would agree on things or come close to agreeing on things that they're not the evenly divided group that I think a lot of people.
Well, it depends on how energetic John Roberts feels.
Well, that's a big part of it. Yeah,
to go through his mental gymnastics that he does every now and then.
Yes.
You also mentioned what appear to be threats of various malcontents to quote unquote burn the place down if the president and the Senate proceed with the nomination. And Americans typically don't respond very well to threats, do they?
I hope not. It's hard to know. They need to hear about the threats, for one thing, and it's a little bit harder to get the message out right now with a monochrome media that tends to downplay the violence and the chaos and describe it as mostly peaceful. So, but no, I'd like to believe that America has still got a lot of spine and will stand up to terrorism, domestic or foreign.
I think that the threats, pardon me, I think that the misrepresentations from the media with respect to these protests, where they mostly peacefully burned places down, I think people are seeing through that. And I think it's one of the reasons why the Democrats are starting to say, hey, guys, we can't do this. They're not being listened to. I mean, you create the mob. Don't be surprised if it comes after you as well.
Right, exactly. America is half urban or half not rural now for the first time. The world is approaching that. But America's half urbanized, and that's where the action is. So a lot of people are seeing firsthand, the parts of town they can't drive through without seeing the chaos.
Yeah, and I was talking with my wife last night. We have a friend of ours, a dear family friend that lives in Louisville, Kentucky. And he texted about the two police cops that were shot last night. And I asked my wife, I said, well, at what point did it become acceptable that a specific demographic would totally go crazy if a court case didn't go the way they want to go, and that we expect it? We brace ourselves for it. The National Guard are called in. The police are beefed up. No days off. Everything. People board their shops because if something doesn't go the way that the folks want to in the legal system, even though it's a grand jury, even though the system is set up and works and the evidence is reviewed, we're going to go batty. I'm I'm grasping, trying to figure out when did that become acceptable? Because we have de facto accepted it, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. There's defining deviance, two blasts from the past. Defining deviance down for one, right? And this is that in extremis,
right?
And then there's the Bush soft bigotry of low expectations, and that's where we are in a big way. Where we've come to accept just about anything from aggrieved people, and are very uncritical of what constitutes a grievance anymore.
Which is a condescending way to think about people.
Absolutely. And it also masks the real discussion, and that's the huge tragedy here, is that there are real problems in our communities, and we need to look at them and stop scapegoating a fictitious, in my opinion, problem of institutional racism, because that masks the real problem. We're surrendering another generation to the real problem while we act offended, a small number act offended in a bad way about a fictitious problem.
Right. And the real problem was addressed.
That's a tragedy.
The real problem was addressed way back in the 60s by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who talked about illegitimacy rates and the results of that. So, yeah.
We understood once what the problem was, and we also understood how to fix it, and we were on a path to fixing it until we got overzealous and began enacting programs.
Yeah, which harvest votes. But anyway, boy, we could just talk for about an hour on that, couldn't we? So I'm going to just change gears again. This is where I advise my guests to have a neck brace on so they don't get whiplash. But I want to talk about Ricochet real quick, because you joined back in 2017, if I read that correctly.
I think that was right, yeah.
How did you find the site initially?
It was a podcast. I don't remember which one. It was probably a Rob Long pitch, although I think it were Peter Robinson.
That is the most normal. That's the most often heard refrain, is Rob talking about skin in the game and all that. I'm like, okay, I better help out.
It could have been, or it could have been Andrew Klavan. He's one of my absolute favorite.
Oh yeah.
And a thoroughly decent man, and it may well have been there. I don't remember where it was, but it sounded great. It sounded terrific to have a forum for conservative, thoughtful, polite people, and so I jumped on.
Looking at your profile where you talk about opining cantankerously, which I really, really like, and your desire to save the nation and its culture through cantankerously opining. Sounds like a great fit to me. Have you kind of found your niche here on Ricochet? Is it kind of a good, this is the place that works for you?
It does. It's a terrific place for a lot of reasons. Again, it's polite. It's a very bright group of people who you have to make sense when you talk on Ricochet. It's not like the wider internet where you can say pretty much anything and somebody will echo it.
Right.
I've been posting my opinions about things since 1990 on CompuServe, so it's just something I like to do. But Ricochet is a terrific environment for doing that. I probably get as much exposure on Facebook, frankly, but it's a different kind of environment and different feedback. My goal is to. I write computer software and raise children. That's what I do. My goal is to.
How do you not?
That's my life.
It's like eating ice cream too fast. You get a brain headache from all that.
There you go. I'm a dad first, a programmer second, and a cantankerous opiner third. And although now as an empty nester, I do more of it. Yeah. But there's a crying need, I think, for people to say simple truths plainly and politely.
Yeah. And
Ricochet is good for that. And I just want the message to get broader. I want more people to hear it. I want people to feel equipped, conservatives to feel equipped to say simple truths without feeling embarrassed or like they're maybe foolish and missing something big and important.
Right.
America's not a racist country. There are two sexes. Global warming's manageable. There's a lot of simple truth that people need to be equipped to say.
Yeah, they're simple truths. They're not always easy to abide by, but they're easy to understand.
You're also preaching them against the gale of left media, and that makes it really hard. And that's why that piece about the Supreme Court, you'll hear all sorts of nonsense about why it's wrong somehow for the president to do his job and the Senate to do its job, as if there's something peculiar about the last year of a president's presidency. There's not.
Yeah.
It's politics, and it's perfectly okay to do your job, even in the, Ginsburg herself, the late Justice Ginsburg, said a president doesn't stop being a president in his last year in office. And she was correct. Right. The president's still the president, and he still has a job to do. And I hope he does it.
And I really liked the question that you posed a couple of days ago on a separate post. And I'm going to quote you because this is just gold.
Please do.
It is given the very real possibility of a Democrat victory in November. I think it's important that we ask the unspoken question on everyone's mind: does Joe Biden really have the mental capacity to serve as vice president in the administration? Spot on, sir. Spot on. I want to have you back on the show again at some time.
I would be delighted, Dave.
You got some great stuff. For example, you wrote one piece where you say that the cancel culture is actually intellectual eugenics in action.
Yes.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think you're right.
Well, thank you. I think so. And you were talking to Victor Davis Hanson, who, another wonderful person I admire immensely, along with a great many. And he was talking about that a month ago on your program.
Yeah.
And it's exactly right. We live in an era where common sense gets silenced, and so we all need to encourage conservatives to feel free to say commonsensical things.
Exactly. Now, folks want to read you. They can look up on Ricochet. You're on the main feed a great deal, and on the member side, if they want to take advantage of my offer. But you have your own blog site going as well. Is that correct?
Oh, only intermittently. And anything on it is cross-posted on Ricochet. So
Okay, good.
Ricochet is really my best.
All right,
place.
well, Hank, it has been great having you on the show today. I really, really appreciate it so very much.
You too, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you and yours will stay safe and will remain safe, and we'll look forward to having you on here again. Folks, that's Hank Reset on the Dave Carter program.
Now the best DJ in the world. Probably.
Dave Carter.
Well, that was fun. I think Hank makes some very cogent points, don't you? Points that kind of piggyback on what David Limbaugh was saying. Limbaugh mentioned earlier that the nation is facing dire consequences, really, with respect to the incessant threats against the life and property of our citizens, and the need to deal effectively with those threats is paramount. So I think this isn't just a fork in the road that we're approaching. We're approaching a decision between staying on the road and jumping into a sinkhole from which there may not be any escape. So put another way, you have a party that respects the rule of law, and you have a party that excuses and enables the rule of mobs. There's your choice. Now, if you enjoyed the show today and you'd like to hear more of this kind of thing or read a collection of my columns and essays and stuff, then I invite you to go over to DaveCarterOnline.com, where you'll find a lot of more of this sort of thing, from articles I've written over the years to current articles of interest that others have written. And there's a page of podcasts for your listening pleasure, and a page called The Inkwell, which is where I at times take a break from politics and write more introspective pieces for the readers of the website, including a piece that I wrote just this last week, just a few days ago, called What If You Could Do It All Over Again? What if you could start fresh? And I used to say years ago that if I had to do all over again, I'd study philosophy and I'd play drums in a rock and roll band, which I think is kind of cool, but there's also a great mark for cognitive dissonance. How about you? What would you do? Well, head on over to DaveCarterOnline.com, check the Inkwell page out, and read all about it. Now, the podcast here continues to grow, as it is currently heard all over the world, and we're certainly grateful that you've listened in here today. Please feel free to go to iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, and write your own comment about the show. If you'd like to, I read them. And, of course, the more good ratings that we have, the faster we grow. So with thanks, gratitude to David Limbaugh for talking with us, and to Hank Reset for sharing his insights. And as always, with special thanks to you, the listener, I'm Dave Carter, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Dave Carter Show. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you won't miss a single episode. And while you're there, please leave a review and tell us what you think. And on behalf of all of us at The Dave Carter Show and the Ricochet Audio Network, thank you for listening.